Hi everybody, it's David from Doctors of Running, and today we have a fun head-to-head battle. We have one that I've been really looking forward to. That's the Saucony Endorphin Elite versus the Nike Alphafly 3. Two of the big super shoes on the market right now. Obviously, the Endorphin Elite was seen on a lot of people's feet, at least at the races I was running, between comparisons with the Vaporfly 3 and some of the other super shoes that were out there. Alphafly 3 continues upon the Alphafly line, the popular shoe that we've seen Eliud Kipchoge run, Kelvin Kiptum, Sifan Hassan. So they've put a lot of work into this one, and this is a big comparison video because these are two of my favorite shoes and two of my favorite performance options that are out there. And so I have a lot of numbers written down, so we'll go into the comparison of the specifications here. But we'll start off with the Saucony Endorphin Elite, men's size 9, 7.2 ounces, 204 grams. On women's size 8, we're looking at 6.5 ounces and 185 grams. And this platform is a 39.5 millimeters of stack in the heel, 31.5 in the forefoot. That's an 8 millimeter drop. And this uses PowerRun HG midsole versus the PowerRun PB midsole seen in the Endorphin Pro 3. Streamlined outsole, carbon plate, very spooned out, sharp toe spring. Now looking at the Nike Alphafly 3, going down the specifications. Men's size 9, 7.0 ounces, 198 grams, so just a tiny bit lighter. Women's size 8, 6.1 ounces, 174 grams. And this is a 40 millimeters of stack in the heel, 32 millimeters of stack in the forefoot, 8 millimeter drop as well. So very similar specifications. This does use ZoomX midsole as well as the AirPods. One big differentiation between the Alphafly 2 and the Alphafly 3, that ZoomX is now one piece, and it goes, essentially it creates this little bridge along the medial and lateral side there, and that plate runs full, and then you have the AirPods underneath. So a little bit more of a single piece unit versus that deconstructed midsole that you've seen before. Going into similarities for these shoes, the toe off. Both have sharp toe springs up front. Both have very lively forefoot bounces. I will say from a midsole standpoint, ZoomX has a lot more compliancy to it. You can really feel it like a trampoline where it compresses under you, and you do get a lot more of a bouncy sensation coming off the forefoot. Both of the midsoles still have a certain aspect of firmness to them. They're very protective underfoot, but they aren't mushy soft like something like Feel Cell or some of the other foams out there where you really feel soft underfoot. These both have a certain aspect of holding their structure essentially. Looking at the ride of the shoes outside of that forefoot comparison, looking at the heels, they both have relatively flat, balanced, mild, moderate heel bevels. The foams do have some compliancy, so they can get away with that where you have a little bit more dig into the ground and then you kind of get onto that midfoot. The heels are pretty similar between the two. I will say that's a little bit more trampoline-y in the Alphafly, and you have a little bit more of a predictable ride on the Endorphin Elite there. And looking at the fit across the two in that heel region, you have a little bit of a bucket sensation in the Endorphin Elite where it wraps around on the PowerRun HG, and then you have just like this little outer external part. It's not really a heel counter, but it holds that area a little bit. But it does a good job of locking that heel in. When we look at the Alphafly, kind of a similar design. They do have an internal heel counter in there, so it's a little rigid there, but it's pretty shallow. So it cuts off right about there. And then that is also embedded with that external ZoomX that wraps around. So they both give you kind of a bucket heel sensation and give you a good hold on that heel. Going into the midfoot on the fit section there, they both lock down really well. I will say that the tongue on the Endorphin Elite and the volume through that midfoot is just a little bit higher. I don't slide around at all. It's actually one of the better lockdowns for my feet, but it's just a little bit more accommodating in the midfoot than the Alphafly. The Alphafly is a one-piece atom knit upper that they designed to be breathable and also just have a little bit more strength to it with different directions compared to previous versions. The tongue is still on the stretchy side, but everything else is pretty structured and dialed in, and that volume does feel on the lower end. They both have performance fits, but I will say that I can feel the laces a little bit more in the Alphafly 3. Width is pretty similar. I mean, they're normal to slightly narrow. They're racing shoes, and that's what you see. The Endorphin Elite, I will say, is a little bit more accommodating. So those that have a little bit more wider footbeds might gravitate more towards the Endorphin Elite for that section. The forefoot, they both have like decently wide toe boxes and forefeet for racing shoes. And I will say the volume up front is pretty similar between the two as well. So there's definitely room for toe splay. There's definitely a little bit of room for swelling accommodation. So depending on how you like your fit, I will say the Alphafly is a little bit more snug, especially through the midfoot, but they both hug the foot really well. They both do a good job of not really allowing a lot of foot translation there. From a pure comfort standpoint, I think I'm leaning Endorphin Elite there on that one, but they both lock down really well, and I haven't had really much issues of the upper giving way or anything like with turning or anything like that. So both really good uppers, and I think they're two of the better ones on the racing shoe side of things. Going into the midsole, we talked about it a little bit earlier. ZoomX has a much more trampoline-y feel to it. Power on HG, it is... Flatter is not a good word for it because Power on HG is still very lively and does give you a lot of bounce, but it feels a little bit more predictable, and the shoe does have a little bit more of a consistent rocker geometry to it where you can really fall into rhythm and just kind of stay at the pace that you're going. I think that really shines at marathon and half marathon paces for the Endorphin Elite. With the Nike Alphafly 3, that trampoline effect that I was talking about is very noticeable. You really kind of land and kind of crash onto that foam, and then that forefoot with the plate and the AirPod, it really gives you a big bounce off the forefoot. So if you're looking to kind of be in that pitch forward and have that real bouncy toe off all the time, that could be a good option for the Alphafly. I will say taking the shoes through their paces, at 5K paces, I will say the Alphafly 3 responds a little bit better, I think, because you have that stiff forefoot, you have kind of that bouncy, lively ZoomX and that trampoline feel, and so you can really kind of open your stride and kind of eat up some ground there. I will say, though, because you get that sensation, you got to be able to control your legs in the Alphafly 3 as well. And so that changes things when you go to marathon pace. It's still comfortable, it's still plenty of cushion. Obviously, you're seeing good marathoners run in this shoe, but I do feel like there's a little bit of self-discipline that you kind of need when you're running in this shoe. Versus the Endorphin Elite likes to fall into rhythm, and they both have really responsive midsoles. I mean, I can say from personal experience that they're pretty comparable from a performance standpoint, and if I'm racing and I'm really kind of putting it out there, they both are solid. It's really what you want out of the experience of the shoe. Looking at the outsole coverage and how it feels underfoot, I will say if it's wet conditions, neither of these are phenomenal, but they get the job done. Looking at outsole coverage, they both have a decent amount of exposed midsole. This is, if the lighting's a little bad there, that is rubber on the heel there for the Alphafly 3, but this is all exposed ZoomX there. And for whatever reason, that exposed ZoomX, I do find it to be a little slick. So if I'm on the track or if I'm on the road, I do notice a little bit of a slide in the midfoot for me, but that forefoot does have good traction, and that seems to save the day there. And it's a wide platform, good stable forefoot that you can really lever off of. When we look at the Endorphin Elite, it's a pretty similar construction. You have a pretty wide base of that outsole, a little less tready, but it does stick to the road pretty well. You have some on that lateral heel there. It's exposed on the inside of the midfoot, but I haven't really had an issue there. I've really, because it's a little bit on the flatter end on the outsole, I've noticed the shoe as a whole can be a little slippery on water, but it's not bad. It's really only in areas where if you have some concern about it, you're probably going to have some concern about it on almost any other racing shoe. But they're both streamlined shoes designed to go fast over the road. Now, if I'm cornering and doing hard things like that, they both corner surprisingly well. I think I do just have a little bit more of a natural foot on my a fit on my foot for the Endorphin Elite to turn and navigate things. But I will say, because of the ride of the shoe and how well it locks down and how resistant it is to turning on the track, I actually do like the Alphafly 3 more between the two. So both really lively shoes with good experiences there, and there really isn't a wrong answer. If we're going marathon, I think purely out of comfort, it's a tough decision, but I think I might still be leaning Endorphin Elite. It's a really close one. I mean, these two shoes compare very nicely to each other. Half marathon, I think it depends on the day, the course, how I'm feeling, and what kind of ride I want out of the shoe. I think 10K down, I would go Alphafly 3. That seems to be pretty consistent for me as far as getting my legs underneath me, really opening up and trying to like run faster than a half marathon pace where I can kind of let the legs loose a little bit more. But if I really want to be controlled in rhythm, go to work, the Endorphin Elite really shines there. And they're both good for both categories. So you really can't go wrong with either. So unfortunately, I can't say one is better than the other. I think it's really going to depend on the runner's mechanics. As of right now, these are two of my favorite racing shoes that are out. So it's really hard for me to make a decision, but the experiences are slightly different where you do have a little bit more of that bouncy, propulsive toe off on the Alphafly. However, that kind of cannon feel to it, you do kind of have to keep your legs underneath you and stay in rhythm, versus the Endorphin Elite, much easier to fall into rhythm. So that's our head-to-head between the Nike Alphafly 3 and the Saucony Endorphin Elite.